Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelson, professional horse trainer, and with me today is Victor Bahna, who is an author of, I guess it would be a fictional thriller kind of category, your book.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, so a fictional thriller called Heliacal Star, or how do you say it? Heliacal.
Heliacal Star.
Okay, which is the name of the racehorse. And we'll start off with, do you have horses, or what kind of took you into this genre about writing about a racehorse?
Sure. So the quick answer is yes, I do have thoroughbreds. Uh, I've got two broodmares. I've got several horses that are currently in training at the racetrack, and I've got a retired racehorse that I ride on a somewhat irregular basis, I would say. But those so yeah, all the way from birthing all the way to retirement is my involvement with the thoroughbreds.
That's awesome. That's great. And so was that sort of because as a horse person, of course, whenever I watch horse movies or read horse books, it's like the details are what kind of stand out to you if you're a horse person. And I really thought what I was most taken with reading uh, Heliacal Star was you're really telling a story about a racehorse, but how that horse's life is in so many different hands. And all of the stuff related to how racehorses go through their life, you were very accurate. And I thought really in this fictional novel kind of gave a very accurate snapshot of what it's like.
Well, that was one of my goals of the book was, I thought about, who the audience would be for the book. And of course, naturally I'm thinking, horse people and people that enjoy the races would be the audience. But then as I thought more about it, I'm like, why limit to just, that particular area? Let's introduce people into the sport. Let's introduce people to these wonderful horses, and let's kind of bring them inside that world. But I didn't want to do it in a way in which I was overly technical either. So I
Right.
wanted to do it wrapped around a narrative that was interesting and exciting to read about.
It is interesting and exciting. Like, I also wondered if some of your character development wasn't based on people you've encountered in the race industry, because I've dabbled in the racehorse industry. Thoroughbreds are not my specialty as a trainer. I mostly do rehab work. So, off
Mm.
the track thoroughbreds I see more often than racing thoroughbreds, but I'm a little familiar with both
Mhm.
and have spent time at Belmont, which you write about, and Keeneland, which you write about,
Mhm.
and Saratoga. And it's all of your descriptions and your characters really do bring people into the racing world. I thought that was just beautifully done.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I'd say, bits and pieces of my own experience. I've been involved in racing now for about 20 years. And my experience has been both from the breeding side, a buyer at the auctions, owning, working really closely with my trainers, and then also, making sure we're caring for these horses too. I mean, it's super important that these are athletes who are, in top condition, and like any athletes in any sport, they're going to come down with ailments and injuries from time to time. And I think that's really where, I learned probably more than anything in terms of, what happens when a horse does come down with an injury and how do you deal with it. And the most important thing I'd say that I've learned in my 20 plus years of doing this is we always have got to put the welfare of the horse first. I mean, there might be some big stakes out there that are hard to pass up, but you always have to put the welfare of the horse first. And I find that most of the people that I've been working with and most of the people I've been surrounded by always seem to follow that credo as well. Um, but
It's
it's a
not
sport where
everybody.
there's a
Yep.
lot of it's no, it's not everybody. There are definitely some bad actors, once in a while that surface, and it seems like the media might gravitate a little bit more towards the bad actors versus the good actors, and that's maybe what sells. But I do try to introduce a little bit of both the good and maybe not the not so good in the book as well.
Well, and that was actually my experience. And people will really sometimes either go on the side of bashing the racing industry a lot, or
Mhm.
like once you're in that racing world, it's kind of a closed world within the horse world. It's its own little world inside of the horse world. And so some people, that's the world they live in. And other people looking in from the outside will sometimes bash it because what is most often in the news are the bad sides of it. But inside that world, I go, because there's a lot of money, there's just a lot of money
Mhm.
in that racing world. And I go, so it attracts the best of the best and some of the worst of the worst. And I go, that's
Mhm.
just, I thought you portrayed that really, really well in your novel because that's what it is. It's not every racehorse trainer is just trying to make a buck at the horse's expense. There's a lot of top trainers out there and people who are looking after the horse's welfare. And there's also, like you brought in organized crime, and I go, yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
Mhm.
And it
But
is part
yeah,
of it because there's just these are high dollar horses. People have a lot invested. There's big purses and it's a lot of money.
yeah, definitely. I mean, where you've got gambling, where you've got lots of money, where you've got, lots of you know, any opportunity maybe to bend the rules a little bit or even outright, cheat. Some people may go down that path. Most people don't,
Right.
which is good. And, as an owner and as a participant, a level playing field is really important. So, I think there's a lot of self-regulation that happens, but there's also a lot more oversight that we're seeing now too, especially compared to, even 5, 10, 20 years ago. It's definitely becoming there's much more awareness, across the board, I would say. So we're
I
seeing fewer and
yes.
fewer of the bad actors and more of the good actors, I would say. But they're still out there, and hopefully we
Yeah.
can root them all out.
No, and it's the same in the dressage industry or jumping or any of the big sports. And I think until the horse industry itself really supports the horse's welfare as a priority of all competition, I
Yeah,
go, then there's still going to be things that are harmful to horses. But I think that's getting a lot more pressure from the public to really make sure that that is the priority, which I support. I love. I go because the people who care about the horses should do better. And what's
yep,
being done at the horse's expense should be called out. And I have to
yeah,
tell you,
absolutely. No, I agree.
in the very first chapter, when I started reading your book, this is just a personal thing. You have this dark bay horse with a white star, and that's how he ends up getting his racing
Mm,
name. And it had me right there. The first horse I ever owned as a
mhm,
16-year-old was 30 days off the track, where a track that used to be in Nebraska called Exarban. And I was like
mm,
16. I go, he's the right color, he's the right breed. I was a jump rider at the time. And
mm.
that horse humbled me, taught me so much. He was just a whole lot of horse to have as my first horse. And I knew nothing about racing. I didn't know what off the track meant. I just figured, oh, he's been ridden.
Mm.
And throughout my career, I've had three dark bay thoroughbreds with only a white star marking. And all three of
Oh,
those
wow.
horses were life-altering horses in my life. And so it really had me on a personal level in that first chapter. I'm like, oh, of course it's a dark bay horse with a white star. Dark bay thoroughbred of all things, not any horse, thoroughbreds.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. That's a great story.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's it's I like the fact that we could start the book, at the very beginning there where, we're seeing the horse being born, and then you really kind of go through his evolution. And it's it definitely is something that could happen. It is a fiction story, but there's a lot of reality within the pages of that book.
I thought you did such a beautiful job. Like I wasn't sure what to expect, if it would be like the horse's point of view, or if the horse or if the whole novel would be sort of about the horse. And what I thought you did so beautifully was you shared with the public a very typical experience of for a racehorse, from birth to, you know, possibly a demise at the wrong time or whatever
Mhm.
happens. But you really showed how much these horses are at the mercy of who's in charge of them, and
Yeah,
that sort of the life of the racehorse, how things can go good and how things can go wrong, but without making him, I mean, he's the main character, but he's not the main character. But you
yeah.
really beautifully portrayed the experience of being a racehorse
I I
from
uh
his story.
Yeah, I initially was going to write it from the point of view of the horse, but then I thought to myself, I'm not sure how to do that. But I thought I could write it from the point of view of a human, and then again how we interact with that horse, and you can kind of see what happens to him, through the different
Yeah.
hands and ownerships. And some of the people, that are involved don't even understand what's happening until it's too late in some cases, and then they find out later, and it's like they're a party to it, but they're not really even aware that they're a party to it. So that's another element I wanted to bring into this too, is
Yeah, I thought that was beautifully done, because then you have this horse on your hands that you didn't expect, and what are you going to do?
that's right.
And yeah, yeah,
And
and how people compromise, how the bad characters in the story. I thought you did a beautiful job of sort of not making them evil, but putting their financial needs ahead of the well-being of the horse
Mhm.
still had the same result.
Yeah.
And I go, that's what I actually see. I did years at different horse rescues, and one was a strictly off the track thoroughbred rescue. And I don't see
Mhm.
people abusing horses like the way the public might think abuse
Right.
happens. I go, that's more rare than it is
Right.
common. But what I see is, like you just said, people are sort of a party to something that they don't understand, or something went down that they didn't intend, and the horse suffers either way. And so now what are you going to do?
That's right.
And yeah, I thought you did that really, really well. And that connection, the two things that made me think it was a personal experience for you was how you described uh, winning the auction at Keeneland for him for Heliacal Star as, I think, a yearling or 2 year old
Yearling. Yeah.
yearling. Okay. And what that felt like. And then also that moment where one of the main characters, Matt, just has eye contact, like
Ah.
Heliacal Star
Yeah.
and Matt, who's sort of a what do you call it, a handicapper at the track,
Hmm.
right? And he
Hmm.
just has that moment,
Yeah.
and I go, all horse people know that, but and I loved that you put that in the book, and that unexplainable connection that came
Hmm.
out of just a moment where they kind of meet each other's eyes.
Hmm.
And I go, that's why 99% of us pick the horse we pick.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. There's just something there, and you can't necessarily explain it, but you just know it's the right thing. And yeah, that's what he discovered when he first saw the horse. And I also kind of had the other characters around him almost making fun of him because the horse was a big long shot,
Yeah,
and uh and he's kind of not sure what to do, and he's having a bit of a rough day, and so he just decides, oh, what the heck, and just kind of goes with his gut a little bit there. And then that kind of just starts his relationship with the horse, which is kind of from a distance, for a good chunk of the book, but then you get to
yeah,
see how they can interact a little bit more directly later on.
yeah. Your characters are complex. It's real life. It's like the way you kind of weave everything together. I just kept wanting to turn the next page, like what's going to happen next, which
Excellent.
yes,
Yeah,
that's I'm sure you want to hear that.
I totally, you could tell me that all day.
Yeah. Yeah, because and I think sometimes when people write about horses, it gravitates into sort of this mystical fantasy or this sort of tragedy. And I
Mm-hmm.
go, what I really liked about your book was it kind of stayed out of those extremes, even though
Mm-hmm.
there were parts of that in there. And that's
Yeah.
what made it feel so real to me. Like I was reading somebody's story more than I was reading a fictional novel, was because it wasn't that, horrible tragedy with a big miracle at the end. And it
Right.
wasn't that fantasy, like, yeah, you haven't met my horse. You do not know horses.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I definitely wanted to make it feel very real. And again, I really wanted the reader to kind of experience, what it's like to be on the backstretch, what it's like to place a wager on a horse, what it's like to have a lot at stake, and just those moments that you experience, the moments before a race, and the nervous pacing that you do, and the superstitions that you might bring, and
Yes,
all those little details, and just the race itself and what could happen during the race, whether it's a good outcome or a not so good outcome, and the emotions of both of those, or what might happen when you think there's an outcome, but then maybe there's something else that happened in which the outcome might change. And so there's a lot of different scenarios that I wanted to also invite the reader into. If they're not Even if they're not a horse person or not a racing person, they get to still feel that adrenaline. They can probably follow along and kind of feel their heart maybe increasing a little bit through some of the activity and the excitement that's happening within the book, and you're just not quite sure where it's going to go,
exactly.
which was what I really liked about writing this too, is I wasn't sure where it was going to go until I got to the ending myself, and so.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think I think that actually played out well because I have a lot of people telling me after they read the book that they really enjoyed the ending because they were like, I wasn't quite sure where this thing was actually gonna go and what was gonna happen, and I tell them, I'm like, well, I didn't know either until I actually got there. So
Yeah, because it's right up to the very last paragraph or last couple of paragraphs that you
yeah,
finally go, oh, okay. But
yeah,
whoa, what
yeah.
happened? How's it ending?
Yeah, there were a couple of possible endings I could have gone with, and I went with the one I went with because I thought it was the best of the options that I had. But yeah,
I
it
loved it.
It was it wasn't yeah, it was one of those things where I was getting everything kind of starting to wind up in the book, and I'm like, how am I going to end this thing? And I wasn't really sure, so it took me a couple of writes to get there.
That's so interesting. What a great process. Like sometimes when I'm riding horses and I specialize in rehab, so sort of altering the skeletal coordination. And one of the most fascinating things to me is not knowing how the horse is going to change.
Yeah.
And that's interesting that that's just as true for you as an author, kind of telling this story and not quite knowing where it's going to end, but you knew when it was right because it was definitely
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's one of those things where you just have to have a bit of an open mind and you have to trust yourself a little bit. And same goes with working with the horses too. I mean, I've learned that through
Absolutely.
my
Yeah.
retired thoroughbred who's 18 now, and you mentioned your horses have taught you a lot. I mean, he's taught me so much, just in terms of everything from learning how to de-escalate, learning how to relax, all of the different subtleties that you learn, and just that relationship, that you build, the bond that you create. And then when I go out to the farm and I get to go collect him in pasture, and he's great because he just comes running right up to the gate, and
Nice.
it's just such a good feeling to see that. And but yeah, all those things, trying to weave it into a storyline is it was fun, and it was good. It was good for me to express that in the book.
I think also like part of wanting to meet you and promoting this book in my own way is I do think your picture is realistic and you can sort of tell you've learned some of those life lessons from being with horses and being in the race industry. And I really, my greatest fear is that people lose interest in horses.
Mm.
Like I go, they're expensive. They give you nothing but trouble, 5 minutes of happiness once a month, and we love them. And I go,
So true. So true. Yeah.
but I
We like
sort
it.
of
Yeah.
worry that the general public is gravitating away from horses. And I really like to do anything I can to promote more interest in horse sports, horse ownership, and that magical thing that happens between horses and
Yeah.
people that is just different.
Yeah. We sometimes say, we could wrap our horses in complete bubble wrap and they'll still find a way to, figure out a way to, ding
Ab-
themselves somehow, but
Absolutely.
but yeah, I mean it's right. I mean, it is getting more expensive. It's harder and harder, with I think land is, getting developed too, and so we're seeing, fewer farms, we're seeing,
Mhm.
less expertise perhaps. And I agree with you that, it's important that we keep on top of this and make sure we also, when things do get expensive, it's not just you throw up your arms and find some
Right,
place to ditch the horse. I mean, you got to
right.
be responsible and make sure there's so many charities out there now too that are helping, and there's lots of different options for these horses if even if you do run out of the financial means to support them, because it definitely is expensive. I mean, these
Yeah.
are big animals that require a lot of space. They require a lot of veterinary care.
And it becomes a way of life. It's more
It
than
is.
just sort of a hobby. It becomes a little bit a way of life. And one of my horses that I've had since she was born is coming 32. And I go,
Oh wow.
that
Yeah.
bond that you have with like they live much longer than your dogs or cats. It's
Oh yeah.
just becomes a much more intense relationship because 30 years is their average lifespan.
Yeah.
And to be with them through that whole life cycle, that mare has humbled me and taught me, like, she's been my greatest mentor and trainer as far as
Yeah.
how to ride a horse.
Yeah. They do that. They do that.
Yeah.
I say the same thing about my thoroughbred. It's like, he's testing me. Okay, we're getting a lesson today.
Yes.
I
Yes.
guess it's gonna be one of these rides. Okay, I gotcha. All right, I gotta pay attention today.
No, and I had one horse. There was a rescue in South Florida where they got a piece of the purse from two different tracks. And so they took all the unwanted thoroughbreds directly from the track so that they didn't. And I don't think that rescue organization exists anymore, but it was a pretty good idea. For unwanted for horses that weren't going to race anymore, that they didn't just go
Mhm.
off to the never lands,
Right.
and they had a place to go, and the organization was supported by part of the purse out of every race, which I thought was a great idea.
We're seeing more racetracks do that too. Like we'll donate a certain amount of money. It's usually $1 or two per start, but you collect that over the course of an entire racing meet and all the starts that happen, and it,
Right.
that can add up. And then there are the foundations that are existing at the racetracks too. And I will say they've really stepped up quite a bit. In the 20 years that I've been doing this, it was almost non-existent,
Yeah.
20 years ago, and now it seems like it's becoming a much bigger deal. And even on the racing channels, you'll hear adverts and promotions and stuff like that for the retired thoroughbreds. So
Yes.
we're definitely seeing a lot more attention being spent on this, which is great. I have a question for you actually on the
Hmm.
rescue side of things.
Hmm.
So, how do you avoid some of these scams that might be going on with maybe a kill buyer, for example, who puts their horse on Facebook and says if you don't do
Yeah.
this in the next 30 I guess 2 3 days, the horse is going to end up on a trailer, and then it kind of.
Yeah, it's and I loved that you brought that into your book because there was such a big hubbub about, no more horse slaughter in the US.
Hmm.
And I was actually opposed to that because it was regulated by the FDA. And
Mm-hmm.
now what we're getting are horrible conditions of horses
Mm-hmm.
being transported across the border and
That's right.
horrible unsupervised deaths and
Mm-hmm.
fear and pain and all of that. So I
Mm-hmm.
loved that you sort of brought that into the book. And these kill buyers, what I think is that if you're going to look for a rescue horse from any rescue,
Mm-hmm.
that a legit rescue is going to have a website. They're going to list their 501(c)(3) number.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to have a protocol. And if you can get there in person, you get a much better feel for whether it's legit. I go,
Right.
people who are buying horses off the internet, good luck,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Like, I go, I would want at least somebody I know to go see that horse in person because
Right.
there's things you can do with video. And even if, people have the best intentions, but
Well,
the
they usually
same
do, but
the same horse can kind of react to different people in different ways. And for any of my clients, never, ever, 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 ever put your horse up for free or cheap. I go, you have to list that horse at a reasonable price.
yeah,
Otherwise, you're going to get kill buyers.
that's
And
my, yep,
yeah,
it's exactly the same thing. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And I go, if you know the person or if it comes through a person
Mm-hmm.
I help people place free horses all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I go, that's not like to somebody I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I even require them to sign a notarized contract actually that and even if it's going to be for something, below what you would, if you figure you got to go at least above, maybe 1,000, 1,500 to, knock out the kill buyers.
Hmm.
And if I was to do that, even to someone that I know, and that I trust, I still want them to sign the contract because you don't know who they're going to sell to necessarily. And so I
Exactly.
want to make sure that in that contract it says this horse will never end up in a kill pen or, in one of those agricultural auctions that, they can end up, in that kill pen. And so that's important to me too, is, even if it is someone that I completely trust,
Yeah,
they might have a problem where they can't support the horse financially either at some point down the road. And I just want to make sure that that horse has that just extra protection as well.
exactly. Exactly. And I've had people who've given me horses and they check on them. And I go, I
Hmm.
love that. And
Yeah.
anybody anybody that becomes my horse, this has
Yeah.
been for many years, I go, they're with me till they die. Like they're not
Yeah.
going anywhere because
Yeah.
I think even when you're going good person to good person, it's so stressful on a
Yeah.
horse to have
Yeah.
to change humans and horse
Yeah.
friends that I
Yeah.
don't think I think we buy and sell horses like it's nothing. And I go, it's not nothing to the horse.
Right. Right.
And I also really disagree. I wish they would sort of come up with a different strategy where trainers are not getting percentages of sales, that trainers get out of the buying and selling
Mhm.
business. I go,
Mhm.
to me, that's such a conflict of interest that I think if you're licensed as a trainer, or even if, like me, I'm not licensed, I call myself a trainer, but I go, if I help people buy or sell a horse or place a horse, rehome it, I go, no commission at all. I go, if I don't know the person and I charge them for my actual time,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
a lesson. I go,
Yeah.
I might do that, but most of the time, if I'm helping broker movement of a horse, I go, I
Yeah.
think it's a huge conflict of interest that leads to a lot of problems
Yeah.
when the trainers are getting a commission.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're touching
Like,
on a really important point too, which is, something I've also learned over my involvement in the racing business is you really just have to make sure you know who you're working with at all the time. And you've got to find people that are going to share your values.
yeah,
Because if they're motivated by something else, they might make a decision on your behalf, and that might not be something that sits too well with you. And so you gotta just make sure you're really vetting the individuals that you're working with and working with people that you can really trust and that do share those values. And I've been super fortunate because the folks I work with, my trainers at the racetrack and the folks that are on the farms, we all tend to share the same values. In fact, the communication happens without even having to speak very much.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
like we know what each other is thinking, and I'm really clear up front too that this is what I care about, and it's worked out really well for me. But you could find yourself dealing with somebody that doesn't share those values, and
Yeah.
and that's where things can start to go south. So I think that's
Absolutely. And that could be
important.
the barn manager where you have to put your horse in boarding,
Yeah,
and the barn
yeah,
manager has a prejudice against your horse, doesn't like what you're doing. And it's like to me, the environment of all the professionals that surround that horse, I sort of take it as seriously as looking after my aged parents. I go,
yeah,
because they're part of the family. I go,
yeah,
especially I've been with this horse 30 years. I'm like,
yeah,
part of my
yeah.
family.
Yeah, and if something happens, like things can happen on the racetrack.
Mhm.
My trainers are really good in terms of they'll call me like almost in real time and say, "Hey, we had this thing happen at the track, and just want to make sure you're aware of it." And then we talk about what we're going to do about it, and
Yes.
we'll always take a conservative approach to that, but they know from me that I'm going to be very patient. There might be some other owners that are going to be, a little bit more. And I think I actually kind of expressed that a little bit in the book too.
You did. Yes, you did. And I thought you did a beautiful job sort of seeing from the owner's perspective, the pressure he was feeling and why
Yeah,
he made the decision he did. But at the same time, and that's true from a trainer's perspective,
yeah,
some owners want a performance out of the horse that the horse isn't ready for. And
right,
if I tell them the horse isn't ready, they just go
right.
somewhere else.
Yeah,
And and I go, okay, but at the end of the day, I can only do what I feel right about. And so I
yep,
go, but sometimes I lose a lot of business because I'm not telling them what they want to hear. And
yeah,
I thought you did
exactly.
a
Yeah,
really good
yeah.
job. And the financial pressure when you buy, I actually worked at a July select sale at Keeneland, and I
Oh
go,
wow. Yeah.
big money,
Oh yeah.
like huge investments at that select sale. And um, and I go, wow, that is just so much pressure
Mm-hmm.
to kind of get that horse, making some money back.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can really see, the wheels turning in the owner's
Hmm.
head. Like, I get it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. There's from a consignor perspective, you've got one shot, to make that sale. And so you're gonna prep the horse and get him as ready as possible. And then as the bidder, once the adrenaline kind of wears down and you're like, okay, what have I just done? I've just spent a lot of money on a horse. This
Yeah.
horse better turn this thing around and make me some money. So yeah, there's a ton of pressure that you're feeling, and you don't want to look stupid and say, wow, I just spent a couple $100,000 on a horse that can't run for
Let's hope.
forever.
Yeah.
We all know, I don't know if you know this, but the story of the green monkey, who was purchased for 13 million or something like that, and I think won one or two races in his career, and just nobody wants to be that person. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but it does happen. And it's like one of the actual racing racehorses that I got to ride. He had been out at Santa Anita and he would not even walk around the track anymore. This guy had two horses that were just,
Mm,
you know, given the bird to the training. And so
mm,
he sent them as an experiment to Pat Pirelli, who I was working with at the time. And being kind of the smallest person on the ranch, I got one of them as a project.
mm.
And I think originally he was a $2 million racehorse. And I
Wow.
go, but even before they sent him to hopefully get him running again, because
Hmm.
it was all behavioral,
Hmm.
um, and they gelded him. And I go, well, there goes all of that money once you geld your, like that
Yep.
already, you just
Yep.
cut your investment in half. And
Yep.
um, and so he came as a gelding, and oh my God, that horse was the smartest horse and scared the crap out of me. Like
Mm,
he made a monkey out of all the top cowboys. And he actually gave me one of the best lessons of my life, which is how to persist and never argue.
Mm-hmm.
because if I got in an argument with that horse, he was going to kill me. Like
Mm-hmm.
he
Mm-hmm.
was,
Yep.
and when we finally got him running again, I have never gone that fast on the back of a horse. I go, racehorses are
Mm-hmm.
fast
Mm-hmm.
and love it. I go, when
Oh
they're
yeah.
prepared, it's like, wow, that horse would just race a cow next to him in the pasture if he had the opportunity. And so as soon as he had like a breezing buddy,
Mm-hmm.
like you could breeze him and he would go fast, but as soon as he
Mm-hmm.
had one other horse with him, you could just feel him sort of tear into it, and
Mm-hmm.
he loved it. And
Yeah.
I go, so people thinking that all these horses are abused, I go, it's not.
No.
They love it if they're prepared, if they're cared for,
Yeah.
all of that.
Yeah, they love the competition. You could just see it, as a kind of prep for a race. Not every one of them. Some of them are like, not quite the horse that's gonna compete, but most of them really do enjoy that, and
Yeah.
you could definitely see that in them when they're training in the morning. Sometimes you really have to dial it down and just be like, just wait, save it for the race. So. But yeah, that's actually a great story.
Yeah, and he did race again, and then he got an injury, and but he was a funny horse. If he did not want you on your back, on his back,
Mm-hmm.
there was no rider who could stay on. Like
Mm-hmm.
if he wanted you off, you're going off. And I just went, please don't try to throw me off. Like I was very humble with that horse.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
And
I think
he
they do
ended
that.
up becoming one of my favorite horses of all times. If I had been able to buy him, I would have bought him. But it was like if he liked you, you were golden.
Yep.
If he
Yep.
didn't like you, you were getting ejected. I don't care how good. Yeah.
Yeah. No, they're funny how they pick their people too. They actually have a good sense though, so
Yeah, they do. No, and I
hmm
have one horse here with me now who came from the rescue in South Florida. And of course, she's a chestnut mare, and her racing name is Rarely Wrong. And I
Oh.
go, oh, a redhead who's rarely wrong, close to my heart. Of course, we're going to bond.
I have a horse right now who's up here in Washington, and her name is Lady Attitude,
Ah,
and she can fit that description quite well too. So yes,
yes, Lady Attitude. No,
yes,
and I just loved all the details in your book, like talking about the milkshakes, talking about how the
mm,
horse gets their racing name, which is not their born name, and how they
mm,
go from farm to farm at different ages and different
mm,
stages of development. And just the whole life, it was sort of a picture of the life of the racehorse that was very
mm,
accurate and with the good and the bad and the
yeah.
complicated characters. It was just great.
Yeah, the theme throughout the entire book, the one character that ties everything together is the horse.
Yeah.
He's there in the beginning, in the middle, and the end, and the other the people, even the protagonists, it's their relationship with the horse that actually makes the entire story. And so
Yes.
every the common denominator throughout the entire book is in fact the horse itself. And even though he's not the main character in terms of the point of view or protagonist, he is
Right.
definitely the I it's just the arc of the story that keeps everything connected
Yeah,
together.
he's the hub of the wheel. And every time you
Exactly.
spun
Yeah.
the wheel, he's
Yeah.
he's connected this way, that way, this
That's
way,
right.
that way.
That's
Yeah.
right. And you get to see, just that whole evolution and all these different people that do get involved, from different points of view and different angles and different motivations and then you get to see what happens at the end, which we won't talk about here, but
No, we won't
you have
talk
to read
about
the book
here.
to find that one out.
You do, and it's definitely like I think I read it in I was out of town doing a clinic, and so I had time at the airport, time on the plane,
Mm.
and I just read the whole thing. I was like, couldn't put it down because I was like, I loved it. I did, and there was nothing in there that made me as a horse person go, really? Like, did you have to put that in? So I
That's good. That's good. Yeah. Well, we need to be fair to the horse, but we also need to be fair to the people too. So,
yes.
yeah, and even the racing scenes, I consulted that with one of my trainers just to make sure that they would be realistic too, and what what types of ways in which a horse might be able to stumble perhaps during a race. What would be those scenarios? So we walked through that a little bit too, and that was helpful as well in terms of
Yeah.
just making sure again everything was fictional, but it's all realistic. I mean, you can definitely picture this happening, and
Yes.
that was my intent, is to make it feel real, even though it's not a real story.
Well, and I even liked how you gave kudos to handicappers. I go, handicappers and blood sport agents
Mhm.
are both, s- what do you call it, statistics or statisticians.
Yeah.
It's like they really, like, this is a big deal what they study and pay attention
Mhm.
to. And you kind of gave it a little bit more depth of understanding than most people think, oh, it's just somebody circling stuff on a
Right.
racing form,
Saying, yeah,
right?
no, okay.
I go,
Yeah.
no, people actually study that and look at the stats and pull
Mhm.
together the horse, the bloodlines, the jockey, the trainer, the track, the conditions of the track. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot going into it.
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a whole ecosystem. There's a whole community
Yes.
that's on the backstretch. I mean, there's just so much happening. I think I describe it as organized chaos. There's so many things moving in so many different directions, yet everyone kind of knows where they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to be doing and where they're supposed to go. And so even though from an outsider's point of view, you'd be like, what the heck is going on here? This is crazy, but it is organized in its own sort of, unique way, I would say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when people were adopting off the track thoroughbreds, the same mistake I made as a 16-year-old is we think they've been ridden, they've been handled, they've been around people their whole life. It should be easy transition.
Mm,
And the way I started to see it, what I realized working everything from like yearling farms to sales to,
mhm.
you know, baby training was every person in this horse's life is a professional. I go, the grooms are exceptional. The,
Mhm.
everybody's a professional that surrounds this horse. And then they go to the rescue, and these big-hearted volunteers, these people who haven't been around a horse since they were 12,
Mhm.
they come in, and it really, I would tell people, I go, it's like this horse was raised in a military lifestyle, and now
Mm,
you're sort of chucking him out into general society. I
mhm.
said, so they do get lost in that
Mhm.
transition. And I find horses coming off the track, kind of like what your story is about, is they need to learn to bond
Yeah.
with one person.
Yeah.
Like that's not a given in that world because you
Right.
have the racehorses are going through a life of routine with changing faces.
That's right.
And everybody who handles them knows what they're doing.
Yep.
And so then they get in a world where people are making lots of human error, not understanding horses, they're making
Yep.
mistakes, and suddenly it's the same person and a different situation, a changing situation.
Yeah.
And I go, that really throws them off in
Yeah.
that transition from track life into um, adoption after track life.
Yeah, they've been handled at the racetrack. Actually, like you mentioned, even as a weanling, they start getting handled, and then as a yearling, they're handled, and then as a 2-year-old, they're handled, and everybody, as you mentioned, is a professional, and so they're going to be in control of the routine for that horse, and so the horse gets to you know, rely on that routine as their life, while they're on the track. But once they come off the track, there's no one leading them anymore, and they're kind of on their own. And they're like, uh-oh, what do I do? And they can get really frightened. They can get spooked. They can be,
Yes.
hey, where's that person that's telling me what to do?
Yeah, because they've gone from a very predictable life to completely unpredictable.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And so it's up to us to make sure that they transition into that new life and that they understand, okay, you're not going to be racing anymore, but you could still be working and we could still have
Yeah.
someone that's in control and we can still make sure you're following instructions, but you're also going to have some pasture time and you're going to be able to, be on your own as well. And it's not scary. We just have to make sure that you're okay with
Right.
that.
Right.
And it usually works out pretty well if you follow that process. But it does take a while. I mean, they come in pretty amped up when they're coming off the racetrack, and you've got to really just kind of work with them to wind them down, give them time in the round pen and make sure you're getting their exercise in and slowly but surely they'll start to kind of come out of that, amped
Yeah.
up.
And even things that don't seem like work, that are more bonding exercises, bonding time.
Hmm.
It's like that. Those racehorses have to kind of learn that their world is now the one person is the predictable part,
That's right.
and the
Right.
situation is the unpredictable part. And that is a 180-degree shift for
Yeah.
them from their
Yeah.
perspective. And so it does take time for them to get used to that. And when people pull them off the track and start putting them right into jumping,
Yeah.
or they say the horse is ready to trail ride, I'm like, if you like going fast, he's ready to trail ride.
Like being thrown into the woods. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go for it. Because they'll spook real fast on a trail.
yeah.
Unless they've been out there a few times or more than a few times.
Yeah,
So
and it's just that I don't think people expect, and nobody told me at 16, but of course I knew everything at 16,
yeah.
and that there was going to be this transition,
Hmm.
that there was going to be this, even though the horse has been ridden, it's a very different world than what
Hmm.
they're moving into with you in your backyard.
That's right. That's right.
Mm,
And the other thing too is, the riders at the racetrack are, they're on these horses all the time. And so, they are not nervous or anything like that. But if they get a thoroughbred off the track, it's a new rider, they might be a little bit nervous. And the horse is going to pick up on that immediately. And then
yes.
you're like, uh-oh, why are you nervous? I'm
Yeah.
used to having these calm, very confident riders, and all of a sudden, we're getting someone that's a little tight maybe on the legs here, and it's like they start freaking out. They're like, I should be nervous too. And so
Yeah.
again, you got to really just kind of calm them down and make sure that they're comfortable in their environment and with their new riders or rider.
Yeah. And nobody told me coming, like I was raised as a jump rider. At that time, everybody rode thoroughbreds. That was the only breed I would consider.
Mm.
And of course, I found my dark bay thoroughbred with a white star and said, sold, right? And nobody told me that on the track, if you want them to go faster, you shorten the reins and pull a little harder. And
Mm.
so every time I tried to slow him down when he would bolt, we would just go faster and faster and faster. And then somebody told me, oh, just bend the neck around and that'll, turn him and get him to stop. And the first time I tried that, he's just bolting with his nose on my toe. And I'm like, yeah, that didn't work.
Yeah,
And so luckily at 16, I fell off a lot, but you bounce and you are a brave rider. But he
yeah.
really promptly showed me I wasn't the rider I thought I was at the time.
Well, they can definitely humble us in that way, can't they?
Yeah, and teach
Yeah,
us a lot at the same time. But
definitely.
that sensitivity level too, which is part of the breed. That's why we call them hot bloods,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
that sensitivity is what we want. And it's kind of what works against them as they're making a transition off the track into a
yeah.
hopefully permanent
Once
home.
they do make that transition, though, they're terrific horses to work with. I mean,
Oh,
thoroughbreds
absolutely.
are such good workers, and once you kind of make that transition, I think sometimes people don't quite have the patience necessarily, or maybe the reputation of being a hot blood, and they get a little intimidated by them. But they are really good horses to work with, and so anybody that's interested in an off the track thoroughbred, I would definitely encourage that. But just
Me
make sure you've
too.
got lots of patience and that you've got lots of time to spend with them.
Well, and that's what I find is exactly what you're saying, that especially if they're coming off the track, it just seems like you're doing nothing for several months, but all
Right,
you're doing is all the work up front is creating that calmness
right,
so that the sensitivity then becomes beautiful to ride. You
right,
love the sensitivity. But
right.
if they're overly sensitive because they're anxious or they're tense, I go,
Yeah,
that's where the problems occur.
yeah,
So all the work with a thoroughbred is just very patient, very slow on the front
yep,
end.
yep,
And once you build the trust and they, get a little more self-confidence and they adjust to their new life, everything on the back end is easy.
yeah.
I go,
I
they're
agree.
just beautiful to ride.
I agree. And I would also say that carrots don't hurt either. Plenty of
Carrots
carrots.
never hurt. Yes. Yes.
That's
Although
my
it depends if they come from a peppermint track, some of
mm,
them don't even know what carrots are.
that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
But no, I've had good luck with carrots. So that's my bribery.
Ah, yes. Yes. I go whatever I have. So anything else you wanted to talk about? I'm quickly looking at my sort of notes. I think we covered everything I had a question on or comment. Um, but anything you want to say about your fabulous novel?
I would just say buy it, read it, review it. You can find it on Amazon or any of the online retailers. You can also go to my website, which is my first name, last name, so www.victorbahna.com. And I hope if you do buy it, I really hope you enjoy it and definitely let me know what you think. And I'm starting to think about ideas for the next book. So if you've got any thoughts on that,
Excellent.
let me know because that will be getting started pretty soon too.
Well, and I want to follow that same horse longer because he
Ah,
just,
okay.
yeah, I want to know what happens, especially
Okay.
if you keep your retired racehorses like that whole lifespan, I
Yeah.
think is so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, I mean, the horse, you think about it, the horse races till maybe age 6 or 7, and then as you mentioned, they could live to, 30 is the average lifespan. So I mean, you've got 20 plus years of care for that horse after they're done racing. And
Absolutely.
some of
Or a
them
whole
breed,
second career.
yeah, some of them breed, a lot of the mares will go into breeding. Most of the colts do get gelded, and so they're not going to be breeding, and those are the ones that we really have to make sure we're keeping an eye on and
Yeah,
taking care of. But yeah, 30, 20 plus years of care. It's a lot of
yeah.
commitment.
It is a big commitment. So I will put your website in the show notes and the description box. And Heliacal Star is available now at all major booksellers, correct?
Yeah, all online booksellers is available, so you should be able to find it pretty easily.
Excellent. And I will put the title, I'll put all the spelling and your website. So if you guys listening to the podcast didn't quite get that jotted down as we were talking, it will be written down for you.
Excellent.
Yeah. Well, it was a pleasure meeting you, Victor.
Yeah, thank you so
And
much. Really appreciate it. And I love
yeah.
the comments on the book, so I'll
Oh,
never
good.
I'll never not get tired of hearing, positive feedback and I love talking to horse people myself. So it was great to talk with you today as well.
You too. I know horse people can just for hours. And I'd have one last question.
Mhm.
How long did it take you to write that novel? Was that something
Ah,
that sort of flowed out of you? Was it something that came out over
years.
time?
Actually took years.
Yeah.
The story takes place in 2018, which is when I thought I was going to be done with the book.
Ah,
It started, I think, in 2016, 2017, and so it got published this year. So about 7 years from when I really got started to when I finished it. The first version of it was pretty awful, and I would
that
not
makes
even
me
look at it
feel
right
so
now.
much better.
It was just uh, it was just not something I would share with anybody.
Yeah.
I thought it was really good at first, and then I started rereading, and I'm like, this is just horrible. This is terrible. And so I ended up having to rewrite it multiple times, and then to the point I finally got it where, okay, now it's a good story. Now I can actually hand it off to a professional editor and get it really fine-tuned. But that took a long time actually. So patience. Just, I learned patience from my horses, and I practiced that with my writing.
Yes, it definitely shows, and it's a page turner. I highly recommend it, and especially for non-horse people, I think it's a super great insight into the horse world. And interesting, like the characters are good, so even if you're not a horse person, it's a very good story and it's a bit of a thriller.
Excellent. Well, thank you again. I
Yeah.
really appreciate the kind words.
So thanks everybody for joining us for another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thanks.